You want to be smarter than the average bear. So I'm going to give you 3 overarching principles. And again, I can send you these notes, or you can watch this later and take notes. I want to give you 3 overarching principles because I'm the type of guy that likes to boil this down to something simple. Okay, 3 overarching principles that you should look at: truthfulness, humility, and usefulness. And I put these up here, and you think, you know what I'm going to talk about. And maybe in some cases you do, but in many cases I don't know that you do. So track with me here for just a few minutes. Truthfulness, humility, and usefulness. Truthfulness. Ephesians 4:25. One of my it's been a verse that I have been meditating on a great deal this recently. Ephesians 4:25 says, "Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor." And I love the next phrase, "For we are members one of another." I mean, I'm going to paraphrase that into my farm boy lingo here and say, we're all in the same boat here, people. And we're all on this boat called, planet Earth, and some of us speak English, and some of us speak Spanish, and some of us are conservative, and some of us are liberal, but we're all on the same boat. And so when we start telling each other lies, we're doing damage to the community of us. And that's not okay, right? We're members one of another. I don't know how to say it more clearly than that, but we've been experiencing some problems. Okay, so let me give you, let me back up. So let me give you some things that I've noticed out in the culture, and I can even recommend some books for you to read. So first of all, we have seen the proliferation. I'm going to start kind of at the extreme. I apologize. We've seen the proliferation of flat-out lies. Flat-out lies. I already mentioned one, the Russian collusion hoax, right? The idea that the Russians gave Donald Trump the 2016 election. Totally disproven. How many years was that told to us as if it were fact? A couple at least, right? The Fine People hoax, that the idea that Donald Trump called folks in Charlottesville, that he referred to neo-Nazis, white supremacists, white nationalists as fine people, when if you look at you can go to YouTube and you can watch the actual speech, or you can go online and read the transcript, and he says, "I'm not talking about white nationalists and neo-Nazis. They should be condemned completely." He was talking about peaceful people that were there to either protest for taking down some sort of Confederate statue, and other people that were peacefully there protesting that it should be left up. Those were the fine people that he was talking about. But for that Fine People hoax was mentioned on a major news network yesterday. It's still going on. It's a flat out lie. And there's a really good Prager University video that talks about this. And the guy that's doing the Prager University video is a political commentator on CNN, and he's saying it was a lie. And here all these news networks owe President Trump an apology and the American people an apology for lying for so many years. It's shocking, but if you know anything does anybody know anything about persuasiveness, trying to speak persuasively? There's this idea out there that if you just say it over and over and over and over and never admit that you're wrong, and just say it over and over and over, that people will start to believe that it's true. It's a form of brainwashing. Am I getting scary? There are certain folks, not all, but certain folks that are, and certain news agencies that are pushing flat out lies. There was a lie that President Trump told people that they need to drink bleach, the drink bleach hoax. That's not what he said. There's the losers and suckers hoax, right? Where someone, and it's a funny thing. It's like someone was in the car with Donald Trump in Europe and said that he called soldiers losers and suckers, and then that was reported to somebody it was the telephone effect. Somebody, and everybody denied it, and still, it's out there. It's When you see a politician stand up in front of the camera, they'll say, "Oh yeah, President Trump, he called our troops losers and suckers." It's not true. It's not true. But that's the easy stuff to debunk, if you ask me. We almost need to retrain our brains to recognize certain catchphrases, certain thought patterns that are going on. So let me give you some. Let me give you some catchphrases. I've mentioned these before, I think. Anonymous sources say. Anonymous sources say. Whatever comes after anonymous sources say, just disregard it. It doesn't. You have to train yourself to say, I don't know if that's true or not, but I can't trust anonymous. When a journalist tells me anonymous sources say, I just can't do it because so oftentimes it's proven to be false. I heard one of the best ones the other day, and this was from a right-leaning source. Okay, so I'm trying to throw both sides under the bus equally here. A right-leaning source, the Russian collusion stuff had just been declassified, and journalists were just getting it into their hands or on their computers and starting to read it. And a journalist, before he had ever finished reading the report, said, "What's almost certain to be in this report is," and I'm like, how can you say that with a straight face? What's almost certain to be in this report is, it's like he's Karnak, remember Johnny Carson, and here's what's in the report, and then anyway, you get the idea. So we've got to train our brains to catch those catchphrases when they come up. And then there's a whole bunch in our media. There's a whole bunch of bad thinking, and for this, all I can tell you is, if you haven't read Scott Adams' book Loserthink, you probably should, because it was really good for me because it helped me to. He's identified a whole bunch of different ways that we have as a people right now. It's a very recent book that we have. Got ourselves into a trap of thinking wrongly about a whole bunch of things. So he gives some examples. One of those is mind reading. All the time in the news, there's mind reading. And here's what mind reading looks like. Something happened, and then someone tells you what the person who did that was thinking without having interviewed the person. Well, they must have been thinking this, or, well, they did that because they were thinking that. That's a lie. That's mind reading. As Paul Harvey said, sometimes you got to get the rest of the story, right? Sometimes there's something that looks bad and it looks wrong until you get the rest of the story, right? Until you hear, there may be a good explanation for what's going on. So the latest example of this, and again, this was a terrible incident. I'm not defending it at all. I disavow it completely. But the folks that were storming the United States Capitol on the 6th, there's a lot of mind reading going on that they were trying to overthrow the government. If we all got up right now, not saying that we should do this, but if we all got up right now, we went to the U.S. Capitol and we surrounded it and we got in, somehow we were able to take control of the building for a week, are we in control of the government? I ask you, are we in control? No, because the Congress can vote on things, they can do things. We're not in control of anything except a building, right? If you're going to overthrow our government, you better be prepared to take over the military, and that did not happen. So there was nothing like a coup that happened, okay? Somebody argued with me and said, well, it might have been an insurrection. Well, okay, depending on how you want to take insurrection. Here's what struck me so far. Has anybody interviewed anybody who entered the Capitol and said, what were you thinking? I can't find it. I've been looking. All I get is what the media is mind reading the people to have done. And so that's a big one. If you don't learn anything else tonight, just now that I've brought it to your attention that mind reading is a thing, and it's oftentimes found in articles, you're going to see it all the time. You're going to see it all the time. Here's what happened. We haven't talked to this person. Here's what they were thinking when they did it. That's wrong. It's not journalism. It's mind reading. Another variant is a failure of imagination. There may be a perfectly good argument for why things happened the way they did that you failed to imagine. You saw something and you interpreted it a certain way, but you didn't imagine what was really going on, and there was a perfectly good reason for it. There's the slippery slope argument, the one variable solution. Oftentimes our media we live in a complex world, okay? And Mary Ellen, you know, because you're a math instructor, you know, you probably have your students working equations that have like four equations, four unknowns, right? And that's normal. That's routine stuff that you go through. And yet our media tries to boil down life. The reason A happened is because B happened. It's a one variable solution. Okay, what is the reason that my child misbehaves? Is it just because I don't spank him enough? Is it just because I didn't give him chocolate milk before bed? Or is there a combination of things that have led to that child's disobedience, and I need to start working? You get the idea. There's all these one variable solutions. Do you guys remember? I'm going to tell you a story. Do you guys remember what was the media trying to get the president to disavow? Do you disavow? What was it? The Proud Boys? They were trying to get him to disavow something, and he wouldn't do it. White supremacists. Would you disavow white supremacists? And he wouldn't do it. And even I was like, come on, why don't you disavow this one thing and move on? You know, get the media to shut up. And it's because our president knows, and other folks in the business know, that if you disavow this, now they've moved the line. Now they're going to want you to disavow something else, and then they're going to want you to disavow something else, all the way till they get you down to places like the Family Research Council, Focus on the Family. You see what I'm saying? Sometimes this stuff is more sinister than we really think it is, because they're starting up here. But I promise you, once they get the disavowal train going, they'll get you all the way down. Their goal is to get you all the way down to do that. And so I think that's why he resisted so long before he actually did it. It seemed sick to us, but anyway. Judging a group by its worst members, how great is it that, you know, according to some, we're all white supremacists in this room, because maybe we're in some sort of group. I don't know what that group is, but we're in some sort of, maybe it's white evangelicals, I don't know, but we're in some sort of a group, and because one person in that group did something bad, now we're all lumped in. What about the biblical mandate to do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? So throwing everybody into one group is not okay. Judging a group by its worst members. Sometimes people will say to stay in your lane. You know, you're not a professional, you're not a medical professional, so you can't judge this. You're not, and what I want to tell people all the time is, God gave each one of us a brain, and he gave each one of us the ability to reason, and so we can use our brains to do this. There's other things. It's in the book. You should read it. Word thinking. Probably one of my, there's a couple that you really should know. One of them is the phrase, why didn't you act sooner? Okay, something happened, it was bad, and then eventually you took action. You know, why didn't you, let's take COVID-19. Why didn't you put a mask mandate in sooner? Why didn't you shut things down sooner? Why didn't you close the borders sooner? And the answer to that is, we could all do that, right? If something is good and it needed to be done, we could have all done it sooner, right? If I lose 50 pounds between now and summer, my doctor's going to say, why didn't you do it sooner? Right? Because it's a good thing, and it's been going on for a long time. You should have done it sooner. That's one. The other one, and I think this is actually, to me, it's very helpful, is fog of war. Fog of war, by that I mean, it's just a term that I'm using to mean, right after something happens, fog of war, right after something happens, because we have this 24-hour news cycle that's frenetic, there's this scramble to explain what happened, and we don't know yet. We just don't know. This happens with, can I just say this without seeming to be a racist? This happens with every police shooting of an unarmed black man, you go in the streets and you riot, or you go in the streets and you protest, and you don't even think, okay, there seems to be no cognizance of what happened. What happened? What were the facts that led up to that? Did the man have something that looked like a gun? Was the man charging the police officer with a knife? What happened? And so whenever something major happens, like the U.S. Capitol thing, and you hear analysis coming out of this is what happened, don't you believe it. It's fog of war. It's too soon. We have to let some days go by, and we have to wait. Okay, the last one in bad thinking is this is the fastest way to get me off your webpage. If anything that you compare, if you make any comparison to Hitler or the Holocaust, I'm out. Because I don't know anybody who's killed 6 million people, okay? I don't know, John Pierce back there, you've done some questionable things, brother. But anybody who compares you to Hitler, I'm done. I'm moving away from that page because this is an irrational person that I'm reading. And I ain't got time for crazy, okay? I have enough stuff on my plate. I don't have time to read crazy people. So there's also bad arguments. Besides bad thinking, there's bad arguments. Here's one that I think you'll like. I call this, or other people have called this, it's too on the nose. Too on the nose. Okay, so here's a narrative that I've heard for the last, ever since Election Day, maybe since after Election Day when they declared Biden the president. I've heard this. Trump is playing 3D chess. This is all a FBI sting operation to catch all of those people that are involved in rigging the election. And right before Biden takes office, he's going to expose all this, and all the people that are involved in rigging the election are going to go to jail. Boy, that'd be great if it happened, wouldn't it? But it's just too on the nose. Because it's exactly what we want to happen. If it's exactly like line by line what you want to happen, it's probably too on the nose, and I start to go, it smells like something's rotten in Denmark, So just pay attention to that. If somebody's telling you something that's too on the nose, and I guess there's a couple more. Oversimplification all the time in our news. This is the one I love. Congress didn't even have time to read the bill before they voted on it. Have you heard that before? That's a gross oversimplification of the problem, right? I don't want my Congress people to read the bill. I want them to read the bill, understand the bill, and I want them to have the time to think through all the ramifications, good and bad, of the bill. In other words, I even want them to think through how could a bad lawyer twist this legislation to get something done, So we've gone way off the deep end as people if we've set our expectations as, well, they at least need to read the bill before they vote on it. No, they need to read it, understand it, and I want you to think about this. Do you want your pilot to have read the manual for the aircraft that he or she is about to fly? Well, they read the manual. I want them to read the manual. I want them to fly the aircraft without me in it a whole bunch of times, right? And I want them to get in the simulator and train for like when one of the engines goes out or two of the engines goes out. I want them to get a feel for what to do in an emergency situation. I don't want them to just read. So we just oversimplify stuff all the time, as if reading the bill is enough, right? And then this is the last thing, and then I'll share. I'll move on. But I love. This is another one of my pet peeves. So if you compare something to Hitler or the Holocaust, I'm done reading you. Here's the other thing that I'm done reading. Using the word moral without any connection to the Bible. It's happening all the time. Somebody will just pick something out of the clear blue sky and say, if you don't agree with this, you're immoral. And it could be reduced taxes for certain people or whatever. And it's like, do you even know what the word moral means, right? Anyway, okay, last one, and then I'll move on. So this is all under the guise of speaking the truth. Mind tricks. Here's the latest mind trick that I say. That oftentimes our media is trying to get us to think past the problem to their desired solution. I don't know if you've noticed this. It's called thinking past the sale. Okay? It's what the salesman does. Pastor Brad, your dad's into sales. It's what the salesman does when you're sitting in the car and saying, boy, this would feel really good. This is going to feel real good when you go on vacation next summer, right? You're going to love this ride. He's already put you in the car. You own the car, and now you're driving it for pleasure, and you're having a good time, right? It's thinking past the sale. Okay, here's the latest one that happened. This was a few days ago. It blew my doors off. James Comey, the former FBI director, came out and said that he believes that Joe Biden should pardon Donald Trump after Biden is inaugurated. James Comey, the former FBI director that Trump fired, came out in a news story and said that he believes that Joe Biden should pardon Donald Trump after Biden is inaugurated. Now, what does that automatically make you think? Trump is guilty of a crime. It also makes you think that James Comey's being pretty reasonable here because he's pardoning the guy that fired him. Did it ever occur to anyone when you read that story that was roughly the time that Congress had declassified all that stuff about Russian collusion? And maybe he was creating a distraction to get the attention on the good side of James Comey and not on the stuff that he did to cover up, to make. Anyway, this is designed to make, this is the next part. Comey was quoted as saying that he believes Donald Trump should be in prison, but that would not be good for the country right now. Okay, I've got all kinds of questions. First of all, this is designed to make James Comey look like a reasonable guy right after Congress declassified a bunch of documents regarding Russian collusion investigation in which the FBI was a bad actor. It's also designed to get you to think that Trump is going to prison, even though, this happens all the time in our news media, no crime has been articulated. Ron, you're going to prison today, buddy. Now, I don't know for what, but you're a bad guy. You're going to prison. What? So here's my response. And maybe you think I'm nuts, and maybe you think I need to be locked up in an insane asylum, but here's my response. I want to live in a country where everyone who commits a crime is convicted by a jury of their peers and goes to prison, and everybody who is not convicted of a crime goes free. And I don't want politicians making that decision. In other words, I don't want James Comey saying, or anybody saying, so-and-so committed a crime, but it wouldn't be good for the country for them to go to prison right now. That's malarkey to me. How can we operate in a society like that? If Trump is guilty of a crime, let them bring, or anybody, if anybody's guilty of a crime, let folks bring charges, prove it in court, and put someone in prison. We're so far away from simple truth. Okay, I'm going to move on. So we want to seek a news source that's truthful, right? We also want to seek a news source that's full of humility. Proverbs 11:2 says, when pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with the humble is wisdom. So this is what I'm saying. This is a very simple point. When our news sources get it wrong, and can I just say, everybody makes mistakes. Everybody messes up. In the pressure to get the story out, I understand if the facts didn't get all just right. We all make mistakes. All I'm asking is for you to report when you made a mistake with roughly the equal amount of force that you reported the mistake. That's all I'm asking. And there are very, very few folks that do that. An example of that is Ben Shapiro. Honestly, I mean, I know he's a conservative voice, but when he messes up, he writes articles, essays and articles about his mess up and why he got it wrong, and then publishes them for the public to see. It's very refreshing. Now, not everybody likes Ben Shapiro. I understand he can be a little bit bombastic, but I appreciate it. I've also noticed that World Magazine, oftentimes when I listen to their podcast, they're making corrections to stories that they reported inaccurately. You don't want the people that have the news, the power to publish the news, to never, ever admit a mistake. Okay, so truthfulness, humility. This last one I love, usefulness. Usefulness. 1 Timothy 4, 7 through 8 says, have nothing to do with irreverent, silly myths. Rather, train yourself for godliness. For while bodily training is of some value, godliness is of value in every way, as it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come. Okay, so we want to focus our attention on news that we can actually do something about. So let me ask you this. Of all the news that comes your way, what is by far, and this is my opinion, so you might not get it, what's the most useful news that you get? The weather. James says sports. Yeah, that might be a close second, buddy. But the weather, right? Because tomorrow, is it going to rain? Is it going to snow? Can I drive 100 miles? Should I not drive 100 miles? And I really love Jerry Seinfeld. Jerry Seinfeld did this bit one time where he's like, you've got these weather guys on the news, right? And they've got the scrolling weather radar. He's like, just tell me sweater. Just say tomorrow sweater. That's all I want to know. Tomorrow galoshes. But why is that so helpful? It's because the weather is news that we can act on, especially if you're a farmer, right? Is it going to rain tomorrow? Is the sun going to shine? Because if the sun's going to shine, I'm going to make hay. If the rain is going to come, I'm not going to make hay. You get the idea. But of all of the madness that comes your way in the news, here's two questions that'll slice right through all the madness and give you what you need. Here they are. One, what can I do about it? If the answer is absolutely nothing, move on. Right? The second question is, how does this help me today? And if it doesn't, move on. Because here's what this is Scott's little opinion in his little world. This is what I see the news pushing at us today. Silly, irreverent myths. And here's what they're designed to do. To tick me off and get me mad and then walk away. To get me enraged. Okay, I'm about to get everybody. Are you sick of hearing about these women? Do you know why every other news story on Fox News is about one of the squad members? Because Fox knows that it ticks us off. And it makes us read the article because they put the face with a clickbait title and then we click on it and then we read and then they got us. Now we're mad and we can do nothing about it, right? Because what are you going to do? Write your congressman? Every time I write my congressman, I get this nice little, thank you for your concern. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. And then a staffer writes me and gives me a form letter that doesn't address what I wrote about. It's crazy. So ask yourself the question, what can I do about it? How does this help me today? Here are some examples of things that are helpful, right? There's an illness going around, and here's what you can do to be safe. Here's when and where you can go to get a vaccine. There's been a crime in your particular neighborhood, so watch out, be careful. Here's what the suspects look like. Here's the color, make, and model of their car. So be careful. A business is opening or closing in your area. You get the idea. The thread that holds all these together is the local news is way more important to you right now than the national news, because what can you do about it? You can be aware, but maybe limit the time that you're spending on national news to, 30 minutes a week instead of hours a day. Because again, I'm trying as I get older to pay more attention to my mental health, and my mental health is not helped at all. I'm not going to call it mental health, my spiritual health. My spiritual health is not helped at all by getting mad and then shutting the TV off. It's just not beneficial to me. Okay. Also, I want to give you one more. Before I get into a better system, I want to give you one more rule, because the media pulls this nonsense all the time. You can pick the day, you can pick the number, okay? You pick the number, you customize it to you, whatever you feel comfortable with, but pick a number of years I know one guy that's picked 20 years and come up with a rule that says if somebody did something foolish or silly 20 years ago, but that has not been a pattern in their life to now, then I'm not gonna think about it, right? So-and-so, I don't know, got a divorce from his wife 20 years ago, and it was a big scandal and whatever. Okay, the woman that he's married to now, he's been married to for the last 15 years, he's been faithful, everything's, drop it. Do you want to be held accountable for what you did 20 years ago? If you made a bad mistake 20 years ago, but you haven't made that mistake since? I'm not talking about your pastor. I'm talking about, people in the public eye. I don't want to be held accountable for what I did 20 years ago. Anyway, it's funny. I was actually listening to an interview. I'm going over on my time. I was actually listening to an interview the other day, and the speaker, with complete sincerity, said, we have got to, as American people, figure out how to help people get on the road to redemption. And he was talking about, like, once you've made a certain mistake in the public eye, nobody ever wants to talk to you ever again. And I'm like, this is a perfect opportunity for the gospel, right? Anyway, what's a better approach? I'll do this quick. Number one, minimize your social media intake of news. If you get your news from Facebook and Twitter, you're doing it wrong, okay? There's a lot of nonsense on there, so I wouldn't go there. Avoid clickbait. Train yourself to spot it and don't click on it. Just do what I do. Just say, every time I click on clickbait, they win. And I want to win. I don't want them to win. So if you see and you can go read all kinds of articles about how they craft clickbait and educate yourself, but don't click on clickbait. Curate. Curate your sources of news that you trust and discipline yourself to stick to them. You don't need to check Fox News 25 times a day. You don't need to check CNN 25 times a day. Figure out who you're going to listen to and listen to those. So I've got some suggestions. I listen to The Briefing, which is a podcast by Al Mohler. It comes out early in the morning, every morning, except when he's taking a few days off. So The Briefing by Al Mohler. The World and Everything in It by World Magazine is a good podcast to listen to. World Magazine's a good resource. Prager University puts out these 5-minute YouTube videos that explain complex things very, very easily, basically. And again, I just want to say, not everyone on CNN, I don't trust CNN in general, but there's some folks on CNN that are good. I don't trust Fox News in general, but there are some things on Fox that are good. So you need to be very discerning about who you listen to. I want you to focus on reasonable people, right? Reasonable people. And you can tell a reasonable person because they're not always following the party line. Maybe they're mostly conservative and they follow what the Republicans say, but every once in a while they're willing and able to admit Donald Trump or somebody made a mistake. That was a faux pas. That was a bad tactical decision. We should do it a different way. We should work with the Democrats in this situation, whatever. Listen to reasonable people. And also develop some trusted people, some reasonable people that maybe you follow them on social media. Again, limit your social media news intake, but if you find a few people that are trustworthy, go ahead and follow them and see what their take is on the news. There's lots of Christian voices that give pretty good input on what's going on. And again, you get double points for not picking someone who is beholden to one political party or the other. The best voices to listen to are the ones that are critical of both sides, right? They're critical of both sides. And then apply filters, right? I guess I would say one more thing. This is me personally, I get far less from watching the news or listening to the news. I do listen to the briefing. I get far less from doing that than I do reading it. Because when I get to a sentence that blows my mind, I can read it over and over again until I understand it, right? So I don't know, that's my 2 cents. Anyway, apply filters is the last part. And here are some filters that you can apply. Your personal experience. In other words, every once in a while does that smell right according to what I've been through? Check on the news. The experience of people you know. So if you happen to know someone, if they do a news story on, I don't know, pest control, and you happen to know an exterminator personally, then call them up and ask them, What do the experts say? although these days I don't think you can hardly trust the experts anymore, but if you can find trusted experts, what do they say? Scientific studies, although you also have to read those with a grain of salt, because oftentimes the data in those studies is not the same as the conclusions that they reach in those studies. So you have to, if you're going to dig into that stuff, you got to read that with a critical eye. Common sense is a good filter to apply. Logic and math. In other words, if somebody makes an allegation or alleges something and the math doesn't work out, then you automatically know it's wrong. And then just practically what works. If somebody writes a story and says, this is it, it's the end of America, we're done now, and just ask, does my peanut butter toast taste the same today that it did yesterday? Or is my peanut butter toast like now poison or something? I mean, kind of do a gut check on reality, right? And just make sure that you're not buying into the hype that these folks are often selling. Okay, I've talked for too long, and I can go over on the Q&A. But does anybody have any questions about the news? How to look at it through a more biblical perspective? Yes, James.
I remember when the left was going after Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah. So James said he remembers when the left went after James Kavanaugh. Yeah, that was Brett Kavanaugh. Sorry. That was a political calculation that they thought if they could smear a guy and drum up some doubt about his record, that they could not get him off the Supreme Court. It didn't work, but yeah. Yes, I know you're Stephanie's sister. What's your first name again? Susan.
I teach middle school in Cedar Rapids.
Where at?
Cedar Rapids.
Iowa? All right. I've got family in Iowa. Okay.
In our discussions, I work with my middle schoolers, and I'm sure people here have noticed it, but just how many headlines end in question marks these days. And they're not designed to be headlines at all. They're suggestions. They're there to find suggestions. And to look for conditional language that could, would, might, possibly, estimate, suggest. I mean, the list is endless. Once you really get sensitive to that, like you were pointing out earlier, it's really amazing how much of the information you receive is based on conditional language or is there just to plant an idea. And then just as another source for good news, and I have to credit this to Stephanie, but American Family Radio, which is 89.1, I believe, here in Columbus, is an outstanding news source from a biblical perspective. And it's all day, really, it's all day news with different presenters.
Okay. So I'm just going to repeat for the audience at home. Susan said she's a teacher in Cedar Rapids, middle school teacher in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and she's just noticed and tried to point out to folks that a lot of the headlines that are coming out are designed, they've got question marks behind them instead of being statements, they're questions, and they're designed to implant thoughts into our head. In other words, it's more of this brainwashing kind of conditioning stuff. And just once you notice it, you can kind of see it and avoid it. But it's just, and then she also mentioned that a good source for news is American Family Radio, which I endorse. 89.1 FM here in the local area is where you can find that. American Family Radio. Anybody else?
I'll go, yeah.
Okay, James.
I remember when the Jerry Sandusky thing happened back in 2000.
Penn State. Okay, yeah.
I remember when they were connecting it to Joe Paterno that he should have done more. And my reaction was, Joe Paterno he should have, oh man, I don't know how to say this. Should he have done more or should he have just, I think he should have done more.
Yeah, so James brings up the whole Jerry Sandusky, Joe Paterno, Penn State thing, and that was so long ago. I've kind of slept since then, but obviously, one of the things that it's incumbent upon all of us is when we see injustice happening or people taking advantage of their positions of power, we need to say something to the proper authorities and then follow through with the, Delaware Christian School here we're mandatory reporters to Job and Family Services. If we see problems with kids in our school, we have to report. And it's not always fun to do that, but we do it. And sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's quite frustrating because you report on the same family 1, 2, 3 times and nothing ever gets done. But you just got to keep doing the right thing, right? You just got to keep doing the right thing. And so I don't know what Joe Paterno saw. I don't know if he could have done more, but certainly it seems like there were some warning signs that were being overlooked. Yeah, Steve.
I've always, if you know me long enough, I've always talked about World Magazine. One of the things that I really like about World Magazine is that their national editor, Marvin Lasky, always talks a lot about lamenting the fly on the wall mentality. Where the reporter was just a fly on the wall, and all he needs to talk about is what did he see, what did he hear.
Yeah.
No opinions.
Yeah.
What happened?
Steve says that we need to, that one of the things he appreciates about World Magazine is that Marvin Olasky, who's the chief editor, has always adopted this fly on the wall mentality, meaning I've got to pretend like I'm a fly on the wall and just look at what happened, who, what, when, where, why, how. Don't try to insert myself in the story. Don't try, just what happened. And that traditionally, when we were, I think, young and growing up, that was, I'm not stupid. I'm not naive. I think there's always been some bias. We're all, and that's the thing, we're all biased, right? Every single one of us in this room is biased. The real test of our character, I think, comes when we're forced to confront that bias, when the facts go against it. What would that look? In the case of, I'm just going to use Joe Paterno and Jerry Sandusky. If those two guys, I don't know, I don't remember the story, but let's say that they're deep friends and had decades-long relationship, and they believe that both men are both good, high-character men, and one of them sees the other one doing something nefarious and fails to report it because their bias is that that's a good man. That's the true test of character, right? We have to overcome our biases when the truth is on the line. Yeah. Okay, last chance, and then we're going to wrap this up. And again, if you want the notes or anything, just let me know. Shoot me an email or text or tell me, and I'll send these out to you. I recommend the book Loser Think by Scott Adams. Scott Adams is the Dilbert guy. He also does a daily podcast. He's not a believer, so it's not from a Christian perspective at all. But Scott, somebody asked him one time if he was in Mensa, because he's a very smart guy, and he said he was. But he realized after a couple of years that he would pay the dues to be, what Mensa is? It's the organization for geniuses. That he would pay the dues, and he didn't get anything out of it, so he quit. It's like, I don't need the status symbol to be in Mensa, I just decided to quit because I didn't want to pay the dues and get nothing out of it. So he's he's got a decent IQ, and he wrote a book last year, I think it was, called Loser Think, and it kind of steps you through these different things, the different ways that people think that are getting them caught in a bubble. I found it helpful. All right, let me close in prayer. Father, we thank you for this night. Thank you for this time that you've given us, some equipping time. Father, I just pray that you would give us a more discerning eye and ear to the news. And to Father, it's so easy to fall into the temptation to fret about things we have no control over. And instead of getting down on our knees and praying to the one who does. And so, Father, help us to build a system in our own lives to maintain awareness of what's going on, but just enough to be able to get down on our knees and pray about it and seek your face on these matters, especially as it pertains to national events that we don't have much say over. And let us focus our attention on what's going on here locally, the news that we can use, and how to train our minds to think discerningly about it. In Jesus' name, amen.